It's okay.
Yeah, hello, Professor Sachs, and thank you so much for being here today with us. It's a real honor to talk to you, and you're one of the most recognized professors, economists, and you're a rock star and someone who is not only known for your work, but also known for your honesty, brilliance, and deep sense of human decency. And especially when it comes to war, diplomacy, and how the global order is changing. We're going through a huge shift now, and today I would like us to talk about four main themes. So the first one is Israel and Palestine, then we will move to Russia and Ukraine, US, China, and we will roll up with the global poverty and inequality in the world. So, Professor Sachs, where did we go wrong? What we're not being told, and where do we go from here? Today, over 50,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, including children and women. More than 230 journalists lost their life, which is unprecedented, and yet much of the West still gives Israel full support, and it's super hard to ignore these double standards.
Well, Israel is committing terrible war crimes and crimes against humanity, which is why Israel is in the court of justice, both the International Criminal Court, where the Prime Minister has an arrest warrant, and also in the International Court of Justice, where Israel has been charged with genocide. These are very grave charges, and they reflect the very terrible crimes committed by the state of Israel. There is, in my view, actually nearly a global consensus that the way out of this tragedy and disaster is to recognize the state of Palestine and to admit Palestine as the 194th UN member state. And there's one obstacle to that in practice, and that is the United States. Israel has no veto over Palestine. The United States, sadly, has a veto and used its veto in 2024 to block Palestine's membership in the UN. I want the Arab world, I want the leadership, the countries in the Arab world, Saudis and Egyptians and Jordanians and everyone to say clearly to the United States, you are the obstacle to peace. You and you alone, because the United States is the only one vetoing the justice for the Palestinian people. And so this, to my mind, is crucial. The Arab League has made a peace initiative. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation has made a peace initiative. The BRICS countries have supported the peace initiative. The General Assembly has supported the peace initiative. The United States is the obstacle. Again, I put Israel aside because Israel is committing crimes. It is outside of international law, but it is not the obstacle because it has no veto over a state of Palestine. It's the United States that has the veto, and the United States needs to drop the veto or find itself isolated in the world.
Professor Sachs, yeah, so you were speaking in full support. Please, Abdeljelil.
Hello, Dr. Sachs, and thank you for accepting the invitation. I'm accompanied today by my colleague Victoria, who speaks better English than I do. My the first question is, how do you see the future of the Middle East in light of Israel's genocidal war against the Palestinians in Gaza, the escalating USA threat against Iran, and the deliberate destruction of the state in Syria?
Well, as I said, the future of the Middle East needs to have a state of Palestine entering the United Nations this year. No more delay, no more blockage by the United States. When it comes to Iran, we need a peaceful resolution of the issues with Iran, to drop the sanctions against Iran, and for the United States and Iran to make a satisfactory arrangement for peace. Netanyahu wants war with Iran. That is his disgraceful approach. We need peace with Iran, and this is feasible. There have been 2 meetings between the United States and Iran in recent weeks that have been described by both sides as positive. This is a good sign. The United States needs to stop following Israel's policies and adopt policies that reflect world opinion and American interests.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. But in your Antalya forum speech, you said this region has been manipulated by the West for 100 years, referring to the Middle East. And you also pointed that the US policy is heavily dominated by Israeli lobby and strategic interests. But is that the whole story? Is the Israel lobby is the main reason for this unconditional support, or there something else, some deeper historical, geopolitical, or ideological forces behind it?
Well, the absolutely unacceptable role of the West in the Middle East goes back before the United States, because the British Empire and the French Empire made a colossal mess in the region. One can say almost literally that all major problems in the world trace back to the British Empire, because Britain created terrible problems everywhere in the world. It was a very violent state for a very long time. But the United States has been the leading empire since World War II, and it has continued to meddle in the Middle East, overthrowing many governments, launching many wars, dictating political and military terms, and blocking peace. The main blockage has come because of this support for a radical regime in Israel. Now, what are the motivations for this? There are many, partly imperial, partly lobbying, partly U.S. racism at senior levels, partly ideological or even religious views of fundamentalist Christians who have a particular view, who think Jews must return to the land of Israel in order to have the second coming of Christ. There are many beliefs at work here, but the bottom line is power. The United States has used its power irresponsibly and recklessly and against international law.
Professor Sachs, I will just go back to the first topic that we discussed, the full UN recognition for Palestine. As you said, even if it passes in the General Assembly, we know that the US will likely to veto it in the Security Council. I was wondering, maybe it is a time to rethink how we structure international diplomacy, or maybe it is even the time to reform the UN.
Well, of course, the UN needs reform, but Palestine can't wait for UN reform. It's time for the US to change its vote. It's absolutely important for the Arab world to be very clear, very explicit, and united that there cannot be peace in the Middle East until there is a state of Palestine. And that if the United States continues to block a state of Palestine, not only does that damage the Middle East, but it damages relations between the Arab world and the United States. It damages relations between the Islamic world, the 57 countries of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the United States. The U.S. needs to hear the truth on this. There can be no peace, no normalcy without a state of Palestine. And the U.S. is attempting to break apart the Arab world. This is the standard practice of all empires. The U.S. says, well, we will get a few of the countries to side with us. We'll bribe them, we'll pay them, we'll threaten them, we'll give them F-35s, we'll do something to show that the Arab world cannot stand with a united voice. The British did this repeatedly. The United States tries to do it right now. It's a very important time for the whole Arab world, all the countries in the Gulf region, for Egypt, for Jordan, for Iraq, for other members of the Arab League, to say we will not be divided, we will not be played by the American empire. We stand with Palestine because not only is that right for Palestine, but it's vital for our security, for each of our security, because Israel is absolutely committing crimes throughout the Middle East. It's not only in Gaza and the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but in Lebanon and in Syria, and trying to incite war with Iran. So the safety of the Middle East, peace in the Middle East, development in the Middle East depends actually on ending this Israeli domination of the Palestinians, because if that isn't ended, there will be no peace. If there's no peace, there will be no development. And so it's really important that the Arab world is very clear and united on this point.
Professor Sachs, do you think that the peace will come with two-state solution, or do you see it as an illusion just used to delay justice? Is it still realistic, basically?
I believe that the two-state solution is the practical approach. There are 8 million Jews in Israel. There are 8 million Palestinians in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. There needs to be two states and get on with life and stop the fighting, stop the violence, stop the extremism. And so I believe that this is according to international law, according to pragmatism, according to justice, according to reality that we have right now. It also has the virtue that more than 180 countries support that approach. So while there may be other approaches, this is the one that can be implemented now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we've seen lately unprecedented student protests across the campuses in the United States and in Europe, and especially with the last declarations of President Trump regarding foreign students who support Palestine. Do you see this as a turning point? In your opinion, who and how can protect these students and academia?
Well, first of all, American public opinion has said decisively, no more war. We support the Palestinian cause. We support the two-state solution. That's American public opinion, not Washington behavior, but public opinion. And what the students are expressing is outrage of Israel's war crimes. So this is the basics. Of course, Washington is trying to crush those voices right now, trying to terrify the students. This is the Israel lobby at work. It's really disgraceful. They're calling protests against Israel's crimes anti-Semitism. That's preposterous. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It has to do with war crimes. And the whole idea of trying to equate opposition to Israel's terrible behavior and anti-Semitism is flagrantly false and just simply propaganda of the Israel lobby.
Right. Thank you, Professor Sachs. I propose that now we're moving to the next big theme, which is Russia and Ukraine. You've often challenged the narrative of a brutal, unprovoked invasion, noting that just like Gaza didn't start on October 7th, Ukraine didn't start in 2022. And recognizing that the war was provoked, help us to understand how to prevent it. In your view, when exactly did diplomacy collapse in the tension between Russia and Ukraine? And was there a single moment when the war became inevitable?
Well, diplomacy failed in 1992, and it's been a failure for more than 30 years. Because the United States, rather than saying that the end of the Cold War with Gorbachev and Yeltsin marked a new era of peace, they defined it as, we won, you lost. And so rather than everybody winning peace, the United States said, now we're number one, we can do what we want, no one can challenge us. And what we're going to do is we're going to expand our military reach across Europe, eastward to the borders of the former Soviet Union, to the borders of Russia. And the truth is, we're going to try to weaken or even dismember Russia. That was the American actual policy. It was stated in many ways and many times, but it was absolutely stupid and dangerous. Rather than saying, now we have peace, what they wanted was the ultimate victory. And the only way you can explain this is arrogance, that powerful countries are arrogant. They believe that they can do what they want. They don't listen to the other side. They don't respect the other side. And the United States was arrogant after 1991. Well, it's been arrogant for a long time, but it became hyper arrogant after 1991. And the core of this was several things, but most importantly, to expand NATO to Russia's borders, including to Ukraine and to Georgia. That's the ultimate cause of this war. Second was regime change. The United States overthrew many governments. This is completely illegal and completely reckless. But the United States conspired to overthrow the Ukrainian government in 2014. The United States conspired to overthrow the Syrian government. The United States conspired to overthrow the Libyan government, and many, many other cases. So this is a second major aspect. And third, the United States went to war repeatedly and used its military machine, again, in gross violation of international law. Iraq is the most notorious single case, but it's all over the world. And so these are the real provocations of the Ukraine war. People who know this region, who have lived through this, know this well. It's only in the propaganda of the United States and Europe that the war started with Putin's invasion. There were 30 years of lead up to this. The war could have been avoided constantly at any moment. All the United States had to do was to say NATO will not move eastward, and there would have been no war.
And do you think, Professor Sachs, that now this multipolar world is ready to admit and ready to see that basically that's the only way for the US to run its diplomacy through dominance, through aggression, through provocation?
We're in a transition period right now. There are glimmers of realism in the Trump administration. For example, I think that Trump is trying to end the war in Ukraine on the basis of Ukraine's neutrality. Maybe Trump is trying to negotiate an agreement with Iran. So those are positive. But the United States still, acts like an empire. Trump still makes threats all over the world. Trump has said absolutely obnoxious things about Canada, about Greenland, about Panama, which are very aggressive and absolutely harmful. So we're in a transition period. We don't yet have the United States understanding true multipolarity and true multilateralism, which is a somewhat different thing. Multilateralism means the international rule of law. No, the United States doesn't understand that. But at least there are glimmers of realism now that didn't exist as recently as the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm. Professor Sachs, you said, you repeatedly said that this is a meaningless war for Europe and that Europe should negotiate directly with Russia, but instead of that, it's behaving like a war machine. Do you see European countries slowly waking up to the idea of negotiating with Russia, pushed by inflation, gas and electricity prices? And do you see the negotiations begin? And if they do, will they be led by individual states, or will it be European-wide consensus?
There are, of course, voices in Europe that are more sensible. The Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, is a case. The Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, is a case. There are many parties across Europe that say stop the war, but the major countries are still warmongering. What Britain says every day is so British, and I don't mean that as a compliment. I mean that as a criticism. Starmer is reckless, just warmongering every time he opens his mouth. I'm shocked by it. I shouldn't be shocked. This is how Britain is, but he should get some sense. But the British are still warmongering. Macron is still warmongering. I think that there are going to be more voices in Europe that are sensible. But if Britain and France would regain some rationality on this and stop the hate talk, that would make a big difference and accelerate the progress. I wish the Baltic states would behave with prudence, calming down their Russophobic rhetoric. That doesn't help them. They are small, they're vulnerable, they're next to Russia. Don't use hate speech, try to use diplomacy. They don't try right now. Similarly with Poland, it's all hate speech. It's not diplomacy. So I've been saying to the Europeans for years, use diplomacy. If you want peace, you don't speak in hate. You don't talk about war all the time. You also talk about solutions, to off-ramps, to mutual respect. But Europe hasn't done that for many years.
Yeah, it's true. And what are the chances for peace with President Trump?
I think Trump is basically saying, this was Biden's war, not my war. I don't want this hanging over me personally or over the United States. So the United States is not going to support further war. If the Europeans have any sense at all, they'll say, oh, okay, now we have a chance for peace. They will open negotiations. If they have security concerns vis-a-vis Russia, talk with Russia, see what can be done. Look for alternatives, look for ways forward. This is what Europe needs to do. This is grown-up behavior. Europe hasn't shown it for a long time.
Yeah, it's true. We forgot what real diplomacy looks like. I suggest that we're moving to the next theme, which is US-China relations. And you've said that China is viewed by the US as an enemy because it is a success story. So is that mainly about economics and global dominance, or there is something deeper going on? Maybe we can see it as a clash between two civilizational views.
Well, American leaders don't know anything about Chinese civilization. So if there's a clash, it's not a deeply caused clash. It's a clash caused by prejudice. No doubt, there has been anti-China sentiment throughout American history. And that is basically a kind of racism. And American society has been racist for hundreds of years. White Europeans are the dominant power. They should be. That has been the ethos also of Europe, not just of the United States. That's been the Western idea for hundreds of years. Also racial superiority, the right to rule the world. So these are ideas that go back a long time, and they definitely still have some role even in the back of one's mind. Americans, and again, when I speak of Americans, I'm speaking of American political and security leadership. They don't know anything about China, but they don't like it. And now the added fact is China is a very successful, very sophisticated, very powerful, very economically efficient country. And that also makes the US even matter, because the United States likes to think of itself as without a rival, as the sole superpower. Of course, that's a delusion. It comes from ignorance, not from substance. But this is the American position. So we have many motives, some deep, some even where Americans may not be aware of their own prejudices exactly, and some rather explicit. But it all comes down to a U.S. antagonism against China that doesn't come from causes. It's not because China's launched wars. China hasn't been in one war for 45 years. Come on. So we should understand and appreciate that reality and say we can work together. Now, what will Trump do? Again, he's quite erratic. We don't know. I think Trump doesn't want a war with China. It would be a devastation. So he probably gets that. But on the other hand, he's surrounded by people, and maybe himself, who say, yes, we should crush the Chinese economy. This is, again, a stupid idea. It's not possible. It's not going to work. But it is an American idea. And that's what he's pursuing for the moment. But it's interesting that even his Treasury Secretary has just said today, as we speak, we should de-escalate the trade war with China. The United States can't win that trade war, and blocking trade is a lose-lose proposition. So in this sense, maybe there's some realism also with regard to China. I certainly hope so.
And now I will ask you a question that circulates, at least in Europe. Some say that China, as China gains power, it too could become expansionist. Do you see any signs of it?
I don't. People talk about China's militarization of the East China Sea and the South China Sea, but people have to understand what this is. China is surrounded militarily by the United States in Guam, in Japan, in Korea, in the Philippines, in island military bases in the Indian Ocean. And China is dependent on its sea lanes in the East and South China Sea and in the Indian Ocean for its food and for its energy. And the United States, you can read it in various places, talks about choke points against China. China doesn't want to be choked by the United States. So China's building its military not to take over the Philippines, not to take over Southeast Asia. It's never done that, and it doesn't want to do that. But it does want to defend itself against an aggressive United States. If the two sides sat down, they could get out of this so-called security dilemma. Both sides need to back off. And I often point out, Donald Trump says, how dare China have 2 port facilities in Panama? But these, by the way, are private Hong Kong port facilities. But Trump says that's a threat to American security. If he could think for one moment, honestly, he'd say, well, maybe tens of thousands of American troops in Japan and Korea or in Guam or in the Philippines are a threat to China. China doesn't have troops in the Western Hemisphere, and yet Trump rails against 2 little port facilities. Well, if he could just put himself in the position of the other side, which is how you make peace, you try to understand the other side honestly, then he'd say, oh, yes, we're surrounding China with military. Maybe they don't like that, because I don't even like 2 little port facilities in the Western Hemisphere. So my advice is that the major powers should stay out of each other's way. And then we have peace in this world.
Yeah, Chinese definitely didn't like the last US tariff reforms and China's response. What does it signal to the world? And is it a strategic message? And how might the situation evolve going forward?
China is saying, don't bully us. That's all. And China would be very happy to have normal trade relations with the United States. But China does not want to be bullied. Many countries don't want to be bullied. This is the whole reason for the rise of the BRICS. They don't want the United States bullying them or the rest of the world. And the bullying makes less and less sense because the United States isn't so powerful. It's just got a nasty turn of mind and an arrogance that thinks it's more powerful than it really is. So if the United States would listen to others, not just bark at them, not just make demands of others, but actually listen, it would understand, oh, yes, there is a way that we can live reasonably together, just mutual respect, not threats, not bullying, not unilateral sanctions, not regime change operations, not military bases, just mutual respect.
Yeah. Professor Sachs, now we're moving to the last part of the interview. So as we discussed, there is a huge shift in the world, and can a truly multipolar world emerge if global institutions are still shaped by interests of the most powerful countries, while billions of people in poorer nations end up paying price for wars, sanctions, and the conflicts they didn't cause?
We are already in a multipolar world because the US, Russia, China, and India, 4 major powers, none can defeat the others. Each one is powerful, especially in its regions, but also globally. And so that's multipolarity. What we don't have yet is effective multilateralism, which is different. Multipolarity means several places of power. Multilateralism means an agreed framework to work out issues peacefully and to exercise diplomacy. Now, that's the purpose of the UN. I'm a great fan of the UN. I work with and for the UN, but it's not effective right now. It is not respected by the United States. It doesn't have the financing and the authority that it needs. So I believe that multilateralism comes with strengthening international governance. And we have the makings of effective international governance with the UN system. We should not give up on it, even though it is too weak. We should say it's weak, but it's needed, so we'll strengthen it.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, and I wish you all the best in your journey for humanity. Thank you, Victoria. Goodbye. God bless you. God protect you. Thank you very much.
Thanks to both of you.
Very much, Professor. It was a great pleasure talking
Likewise.
to you, and thank you, Abdeljelil, for your trust and for your work. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Victoria, mille merci.
C'était bien?
Juste.
Vas-y.